so much for your patience as we were figuring out all of the link issues, and excited to have everybody here for Connecting in a Disconnected Work World. I'm Deb Becker with Becker Leadership Impact, and for today, this is going to be a really interactive discussion where I'll be sharing some content, but really looking to hear from each of you as well, both in chat and also verbally as well. A little bit about my background is that I do come out of over 15 years in the aerospace and defense industry, where I focused mainly on leadership development and talent development, and then have been out on my own for a year now, focusing on developing leaders for incredible impact, primarily through leadership coaching and facilitation and doing sessions like this. So with that, let's just jump in. I think everyone's pretty familiar with Zoom, and just making sure that if you want to have the participants button open so you can see the other folks on the session, and definitely have your chat button open as well. Again, these buttons are at the bottom of your screen. So why don't we go ahead and start using the chat box and start getting to know each other a little bit. So please go ahead and just type in where you're from, where you're living, what you're doing for work these days, and then also, what challenges have you faced over the last few months? This has been a few weeks and a few months like we've never seen. So just a great opportunity to just share a little bit as to what's going on in each of our worlds. So if you can go ahead and just start typing into the chat box, make sure that the chat box is set to everyone so that we can all see what you're sharing. So Alexia, thanks for jumping right on the board there. And fantastic that you're still in school and looking to develop yourself professionally at the same time. Okay, and other folks might be typing, and so feel free to keep typing as we're going here. So again, just feel free to share a little bit of information about where you live, what you're doing for school or for work, or if you're between roles right now, and also some challenges that you've been facing over the last few months. For today's session, we're going to talk a little bit about how to overcome your brain's crisis mode and what's going on in our brains and bodies when we are in crazy times like we've been. We're going to talk about self-care, how to analyze your network for strength and effectiveness, and also building relationships again when we're in this time of mostly virtual connections. And one of the great ways of building those relationships is exactly what we're already starting to do, of looking in the chat to really get a sense of who else is on the phone, who else, or on the Zoom, who else can we connect to, who might you want to follow up with after today's session. And again, it's great to see a range of where people are from, the roles, the companies or school, everything like that. So thank you again for everybody chiming in there. So again, this has been quite a few, as I said, a few weeks and a few months. So would love it if folks in the chat could just type in an adjective or two to describe how you've been feeling over over the last, as I said, couple of weeks or a few months. What comes up for you? Yes, thank you everybody for weighing in. So overwhelmed, lost, a big sense of uncertainty. So those are absolutely prevailing feelings that a lot of people have right now, frustrated. There is so much that we are used to being able to plan and understand and know, and everything has just been tipped on its head in a variety of different ways. Everything from how we go to the grocery store, all the way on up to how we're doing our jobs, where we're going, what our kids are doing, how we can see elderly parents, and how we're looking at racial injustice in the country. So all of those things in an incredibly short amount of time. Um, so now let's take another kind of the other side of the coin here. Um, in the midst of all of the overwhelm and the feelings of being lost and uncertain and frustrated, any silver linings that you've recognized over the last few months? Yeah, so starting to, see, some different things coming out. So being more grateful. Cindy, you mentioned people having more time with family and eager to make connections or reconnect. Cindy, if you don't mind coming off mute, what does that look like? What have you seen in terms of people looking to make connections or to reconnect?
Sure, I can speak a little bit about that. It just seems like people are craving that social interaction. And so I'm making more of a push myself as I'm making a transition professionally to renew some of those connections, to just talk to people and see what they've been up to. And I find that a lot of times, maybe 8 out of 10, people will respond to me. And whereas before, I think people are just so busy with their jobs that, or maybe they don't think of networking as a priority. But now you have nothing else to do, and you're only seeing your family members for the most part. People really they're craving that social interaction.
Absolutely. And so the ability to kind of slow down a little bit, fewer distractions has kind of created some of that space for you. Um, and Valentina, you mentioned rethinking plans. What's that looking like for you?
So, yeah, as I was saying, I recently graduated from my undergrad programs from physics and geosciences, and I was supposed to start my PhD in this year in the US. Now, since everything seems so blurry, I started rethinking if this is what I actually want to do, or could I do
Mm.
something before. Maybe I should join the workforce or find, I don't know, a middle master program instead of jumping into the PhD. So everything just like shake in my perspective, and I feel a lot of people it's going through the same.
So thank you for sharing. So really interesting. It's given you this time for some reflection, and letting your mind wander a little bit. So thank you for sharing, everybody, for kind of the heavy feelings as well as some more of the opportunity. And when we talked about the heavy feelings, you may have noticed, your body tensing up a little bit, or a little bit of shortness of breath, or your temperature rising. Those are all physiological reactions to that stress that you're feeling and talking about. And then conversely, as we've been talking about these opportunities of, these silver linings, you may have noticed that your body actually was relaxed a little bit more. You could actually breathe more deeply. And, both Valentina and Cindy really talked to that opportunity of not only breathing deeply, but being able to connect or think differently because you're able to be kind of in a different place and space. And so we're going to kind of be pulling those threads when we now think about kind of what's happening in our brain and bodies when we're in these kind of crisis situations. And again, some of you may know a little about this already, and if you don't, then this is a little bit of a neuroscience education for you. But when we think about just the most basic part of the human brain, it's really that reptilian brain, and it goes back to that whole notion of fight or flight. And so our brains faster than almost instantaneously are assessing every situation. Is this a threat to me, or is there an opportunity for me? And it not only happens from physical situations, but also social situations as well. So when we think about that away state, that threat state, we withdraw and we need to protect ourselves. Whereas that toward or reward state is we are much more open, creative. We can listen better when we're in that other state. So our brain is always looking to kind of make that initial decision and then going from there. So one of the rubrics that kind of our brains use to figure this out is looking at kind of levels of threat. And so if we use COVID as our example here, at least for folks here in the US, level 1 for COVID was, we're hearing a lot about this COVID thing in Asia. And then, it's in, now it's in Italy, I need to pay attention a little bit more. Level 2 was, I'm starting to hear about this more in the US. There are actually, some cases popping up in my neighborhood. And then level 3 is, oh my gosh, they have closed schools. I'm not going to work. We, have to restrict how much we go do our regular day-to-day activities. This is, full on crisis. Our brains actually can work very well in crisis, but just for short amounts of time. And so really what your brain wants to do is once you're in that level 3, it's constantly trying to figure out how to get back to level 2 and then how to get back to level 1. So you're at a little bit more of a kind of a homeostasis level and standpoint. What's really interesting when you think about these 3 threat levels is, where we are in the US at this point, where we've had, where we're starting to see certain states that actually were pretty low on the COVID cases now actually starting to spike. So one thing that's really important to recognize, especially if you're working in nationwide or global companies, or if you're doing academic work with folks across the country, is people are going to be going through these threat levels at different stages. So here in Massachusetts, we have been, in level 3 for quite a while. And now we're just kind of starting to peel back to level 2, where there are but the brain also uses a model that the Neuroleadership Institute calls SCARF. And David Rock, who created the Neuroleadership Institute, created the model. And it really goes to helping us understand the things that our brain is thinking about to determine if a situation is safe and we want to move towards it, or if there's a big threat and we need to really be pulling back and protecting ourselves. So the first element here is all around status. And this is really about, the relative importance of myself to others. The next one is certainty. So really the ability to predict the future. Autonomy really looks at the sense of control over other events. Relatedness really focuses on our sense of safety with others. And the last one being fairness really focuses on the Now, when you think about some of the major macro things going on in our world, when we look at this, When we think about everything happening around racial injustice and the increased focus on everything that has been going on and what we can be doing about it, there's a lot that our brains are trying to figure out, especially around status and fairness. Some things that some people have been thinking about for months, years, and decades, and some things that people are just starting to potentially recognize or think about, or just try and wrestle with. When we look at the middle three, you can really relate the middle three quite a bit to the COVID situation. Certainty literally thrown out the window, which again, we've never been in a world that we weren't able to predict the future, that we weren't able to plan family vacations or what what school was going to look like in the fall for our kids. The notion around autonomy and really having that sense of control. It's why we saw people going crazy buying toilet paper and hoarding all sorts of items, because people needed to control something, because everything else was way beyond our realm of control or understanding. And that last piece, relatedness, we already heard about it, with people reaching out more. As a human species, we want to connect. And so really trying to feel, how can we be safe in the midst of everything going on? So when we think about what's happening in our body, so our brain is going through this whole very quick analysis process. And again, this SCARF model can relate to almost any situation that you come across. I happen to pick two very large macro ones, but this can be, working with a professor. This can be something related to your manager or a coworker or something with somebody in your family. All of these things can come out. But when you're in that threat state, the stress hormones get released. So cortisol is responsible for fear, and adrenaline is really what kind of amps us up from a whole physiological perspective and helps us hyper-focus our minds. Whereas when we're in more of this towards space, we have the calming hormones. So, this is where we're kind of moving into, much more of an even keel for mood, where we've, dopamine is the pleasure hormone. Oxytocin is really what's allowing us, it's kind of called the cuddle hormone, to bond together. So there's different things happening in your body. So, if you've been thinking that, like, why am I reacting this way? What's going on? Why can't I be, really thoughtful and creative right now? Well, if your body is living over here, there's no way your brain will allow you to be able to be in that more, really effective doing space, because you're really worried about literally what's going to happen to you. And so again, as you can see there with the quote on the bottom, that social situations really can trigger this very similarly to physical threat situations. So let me just stop there and see what questions or thoughts or reactions that people have to be thinking about what's happening in your brain affecting your reactions. And feel free to pull yourself off mute or go ahead and type into the chat.
Are we less prone to have calming hormones because we are moving less? Physically moving less? So
that's a great question. So, and that actually, it's almost as if I paid you to do that, or to ask that question. It's almost, is it a chicken or the egg? But we do know that exercise, so to your point, movement can absolutely help lower some of our threat feelings around SCARF. That really can then bring us into a more positive space on a variety of levels. So, so that notion of moving is really helpful both for your brain and for your body. We also know from neuroscience research that even like 3 15-minute walks a day can actually even be more beneficial than one 45-minute walk, because you're actually creating a lot of newness for your brain. You're actually getting up and moving more often, and creating new connections within your mind. So what I find funny about this picture is, on the one hand, this picture might be causing a lot of folks some anxiety and apprehension because nobody has a mask, and oh my gosh, they're sitting so close to each other. But this is aspirational that we can get back here. But any ideas on what people are already doing? And Valentina kind of kicked us off with walking a little bit more. Any ideas of what you can do to bring more level set to these various elements of the SCARF model around status and certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness? And again, feel free to take yourselves off mute or to pop it into the chat. Okay, just in the name of time, I'm going to just bring up some ideas, and you can see in your mind if they kind of match some of the things that you were thinking. So again, it was a perfect plant for going out for a walk, but really listening to what the healthcare providers are telling us that we should do to keep ourselves healthy. So whether that's eating right, whether that's moving, wearing masks, physically distancing, listening and, really focusing on what's going to be helpful for, literally just our bodies. Thinking about our mind, of that notion around control, and really thinking about what you absolutely can control, things that you literally can't, is just one of those things that perpetuates the stress hormones and the feelings of anxiety and the feeling of the pressure. Whereas if you're able to say, I can't do anything, then that's, you relieve so much of that pressure for yourself. I was actually on one of the sessions earlier today, and I think it was Patty Grimm or Patricia Grimm, mentioned this whole notion around, if something doesn't go well, instead of beating yourself up about it, just say, oh, well. And it's that same notion when it comes to control things that you can't control. Oh, well, it's for those of you who may have had kids in school this spring, my kids have watched more on screens in the last 3 months than in probably their entire lives. That's not the way I really want to parent, but oh well, that's where we are right now. And so just recognizing what you can and can't control. Taking in news is really key. So segmenting that for various parts of a day. It's also less triggering to read news than it is to watch the news. So just managing it that way. Creating a schedule, again, gets to some of that, both certainty and autonomy. And again, really reaching out, whatever and however that looks like, to really focus on that relatedness and the need to be together. Other questions or thoughts? Yeah, and Lynn popped something into the chat. I really love the notion around, to balance out SCARF, the amount of, the notion around planning, and also padding with buffer time as well. So with self-care, I'd love for folks to chat in what you do for self-care, and we'll just hit a couple of these, and then we'll, then we can go back to what folks are putting into the chat. But this notion around self-care of putting on your own oxygen mask first. We all know it from flying on planes. And there's a reason that, from a safety perspective on the planes, they say, put yours on first and then help somebody else. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, there's no way that you can take good care of your colleagues, your teams, your family, friends, others in the community. So I know in the chat earlier, we saw, some folks talking about gratitude, having grace with yourself in these very tough times, eating well or as well as you can. Sleep, there's a reason that sleep is the biggest one on the screen here. And this is this is something I'm always working on. I don't get enough sleep, but when I do, it makes a world of difference. And again, when you're stressed, sleep can really help to counterbalance and counteract some of that. We've talked about exercise. And then this last one here, shower and get dressed. It's on here a little tongue in cheek, but it's real. If you know that you feel better if you take a shower and you actually put on something other than yoga pants and a t-shirt. I love them. I typically live in them, but I do feel different when I actually put on real clothes or work clothes or things like that. So Alexia, thank you so much for adding that into the chat. Figuring out what works for you is so important right now, that you feel safe, because you want to do things that aren't going to create more anxiety for you. So going out for a drive where you do get that change of scenery, but you still feel that you are able to protect your own health and protect other people's health, fantastic. That is, I'm so glad that you shared that. So if folks have other ideas, please pop them into the chat as well. Or if you have favorite mindfulness apps or yoga, I know when I've done this session, other times people have talked a lot about Peloton, favorite nature walks, feel free to pop those into the chat. And Valentina, you added taking naps. So just being able to focus on yourself when you need it is spot on. So the first couple of sections that we've talked about really have focused internally, looking at ourselves. The second half here, we're really looking at externally and who can you be connecting with and how. And so this first piece is really around analyzing your network. And really the key piece is kind of in this takeaway box that I've brought up on the bottom. Networking is not about the quantity, the sheer number of people in your network, but it's really about the quality of those people to help you achieve your goals. So you can have different networks to help you achieve different things that you're looking to do. So you can see here we have a 5-step process for analyzing your network, and I will walk through an example. So feel free, as I'm doing that, you can do an example on your own, or you can kind of take down the process steps and work through an example for yourself after today's session. But you can see here, choosing a problem you need to solve. Who would you normally reach out to? Who do you actually need to solve the problem? Understanding the people that you have, do they actually meet your need? And then what's that plan to close the gap? So let's take a look to see what this looks like. So as the example, we'll say, choosing the problem, how do we support everyone working from home in COVID-19? And so if I'm, running a large company, this was a huge challenge that, thousands of companies faced. So here you see my list of go-to contacts. I go to Shaquanda for HR, Ariel for relationship management, Michael is my comms guy, and Alex is in finance. So you'll also see that each of them plays a particular role. So I is an influencer, D is a decision maker, CT is innovator or creative thinker, S is the subject matter expert, and CN is a connector. So they do different things. So it's not just the who, but it's the what that they can do to help you solve your challenge or your problem. So now so those are my go-tos. Now separately, I'm going to think about, okay, for this problem of moving our whole workforce from physical buildings to working from home, who do I need to involve? So you can see here, the list of functions or roles that I need. Now I take it to the next step and I start doing my comparison. And the really cool thing is I find out that not only, so for HR, I need somebody who's a subject matter expert. And look at that, Shaquanda is not only a subject matter expert, but she's also an influencer. That's a boon in my network. That's great. What I'm also finding out that while I have Alex in finance, he's a connector. But when I look further down, what I actually need is somebody who's a decision maker. Okay, so now I'm starting to see a gap in my network. Now the next gap that I'm noticing is in my regular list of go-tos, I don't have anyone in emergency preparedness or in cybersecurity. That's going to be a big deal as we look to shift the whole workforce home. So now I'm really able to take a look at my to-do list to say, okay, for this to be an effective transition to get everyone to work from home in the world of COVID, I can reach out to Ariel because she used to work in IT, and she can connect me with somebody in cybersecurity. And while Alex is no longer the decision maker in finance, he should be able to tell me who is the decision maker so I can leverage, his connections. And emergency preparedness. I don't really have anyone in my network, but wait a minute. I actually attended a presentation that Nathan gave last year on emergency preparedness. I could actually reach out to him. And so it really gives you that opportunity to take your network and go that next step. So I know I went through that very quickly, but let me again just take a pause there and see what thoughts that you have. How does that resonate with you? What do you think about that 5-step process to look at your network and how well your network is working for you?
I'm sorry, Deb, could you repeat the 4th step? We kind of missed it.
Sure. So the 5 steps that we just went through. So choosing the problem that you need to solve. So in terms of how to analyze your network, identify who's in your network that you normally would go to. And then separately thinking about the types of people you actually need to solve your problem or your challenge, comparing those 2 lists, and then creating a plan to close that gap. So it's a very different way to look at thinking about who's in your network and who you need in your network. So again, any initial thoughts or reactions to applying this to your world? So in the chat box, why don't you go ahead and type in, if you think that this is something that you would be able to use, go ahead and type in yes. If you're not sure, type in not sure. And if you said, nah, I'm not so sure it's going to be a match for me, go ahead and type in no. Okay, so Alexia and both Valentina have really identified a couple of key pieces here. So Alexia, you'd already been thinking about a gap, and now this is kind of another way to look at the gap. And then Valentina, you're identifying that you're not even sure how to classify the types of people you need. And what's really fantastic about both of those is that you're at different places, but it's driving you to a place of being really thoughtful and thought-provoking about who you need and why. And if you're not sure who you need, then it's an opportunity to reach out to various people to say, this is the challenge that I'm having, or this is what I'm looking to do, or I'm trying. I think Valentina, you were the one who's saying you're trying to decide, do you go for the PhD right now, or do you shift gears and do something different? Who are those people that you can reach out to have some preliminary conversations? And then who do they think that you should talk to continue figuring it out? And that's how you can start to build some of that list around who, what are the types of people that you might need to think about a problem. So the more people that you bring in, the more helpful it can be from a collaboration standpoint. Anything else that folks wanted to add in here? Okay. So we'll take that one step further when thinking about how do you build and maintain relationships in this time where, some workplaces are starting to come back, but for the most part, we're still pretty virtual. So what does that look like? And I'm just going to bring up everything on this slide. So this was an article written earlier this year by Carrie Cross from Harvard Business Publishing. And I loved both the acronym around CLOSE and also the quote at the top. So as a human species, we are wired for connection, especially in crisis times. That is what people do. We come together. And what's been fascinating about this crisis is that this is the one time that the safest thing to do is actually not to be physically together. That literally goes against human DNA. And our whole way that we know to be human. So this idea around close is really thinking about how do you create those meaningful connections? And we had some really good ideas earlier in the session. What does that look like, whether it's with your immediate family, with extended family, with friends you haven't talked to in years, or just you've been out of touch with because life has been busy, and your teams, your colleagues, how do you create those connections, both big and small? Thinking about how to leverage technology smartly. I think we've all been living in the Zoom world. Sometimes it makes sense to Zoom, and sometimes a phone call is just fine. Figuring out when to do which one. Pulse checks cannot be overstated enough right now, and really seeing how are people doing, and recognizing that between COVID, working from home, kids in school, elderly parents, everything happening with racial injustice, not having a clue as to what summer and fall may look like, constantly checking in with people because people's emotions are going like this. And they may be fine one day and not fine the next day. So especially if you're leading teams or departments, it's great to be checking in. And if you are in school or an individual contributor, checking in with your friends and your peers is really important. This piece around feelings, share your concern. This is the time to be vulnerable because everybody is feeling vulnerable at this point. And showing compassion is key, assuming positive intent and thinking, how can I help? So, here's a couple of follow-on pieces. And just so everyone knows, I'm happy to send out a few of the slides that have a lot of the text on them. If you want to put your contact information into the chat, I'm happy to follow up and send a couple of follow-up pages out to you. But again, really thinking about where people are starting from. Introverts and extroverts are having radically different experiences right now in this work from home world. The other pieces of think about what needs to be done formally and what needs to be done informally. Some of you may have already seen or experienced some of these ways to stay in touch with peers. I'd love it if folks have some other ideas that you've seen work really well of how to stay in touch and get to know each other in a different way. Virtual coffee breaks, happy hours. If you can take a call and go for a walk at the same time, fantastic. Earlier today, I was listening to a recorded call and I, was doing laundry. So great, killed two birds with one stone. And that was a way to get some movement in, and I was able to listen to the call at the same time. Thinking about where you can add humor in and even where you can volunteer. Again, these kinds of things release those positive hormones that move our brains to that toward state, that green state, so that we can be more open to be more creative and effective and productive. Last but not least, if you are leading a team, really, I cannot overemphasize, what is listed here of really how you are and how you behave. And I'd say this even if you're not leading a team as well, that is what people are going to remember in these times. No one's going to remember the to-do list. No one's going to remember, did you make this deadline or miss that deadline? But did you show up for people? Did you give people flexibility? Did you demonstrate that you cared? That's really what people are going to remember. So I know we're super tight on time here. So we'll do this a little bit reflexively or reflectively, but go ahead and write down for yourself. And if you have a minute, go ahead and put it in the chat box. What are the one or two things that you are going to take from today that you're going to do differently going forward? So really, this is the linchpin of not only this session, but all of the sessions you've attended today and the whole conference. Really driving that accountability to what actions are you going to take so that you're really able to do something differently going forward, and you can be either more focused, more zen, more effective. You have a stronger network. You can care for yourself a little bit better. You can be in touch with others in a different way. You can understand what's going on in your head, whatever that might be. So with that, I also just wanted to let folks know, if you are looking to follow up, please reach out. I would love to chat with you. You can see there that I'm offering a free consultation. So whether it's a coaching session or to chat about any of these ideas further, please reach out to me in any of those ways that you see on screen. And last but not least, thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you for your patience as we were working through some of the technical glitches today. Enjoy the conference, get a lot out of it, share with your colleagues, both online and when you're back together with them in person or either on a different Zoom call. But I love seeing some of the actions popping up into the chat. And with that, thank you all so very much for your time and your engagement today, and wish you all well going forward. Thanks again.